The message came quietly through the static of deep space, one cold night above Earth. The signal, weak and broken by distance, carried on faint waves that brushed against the sensors of an old listening array hidden in the mountains. The technicians first thought it was noise, but then the computer picked up patterns and repeated tones that could not be random. They sent the data to the main center, and within hours the Earth Alliance confirmed what it was. It was a distress call, not from any human colony, not from any ship. They knew the voice was strange, soft and filled with fear. It spoke in a language unknown, but the tone was clear. It was someone begging for help. Commander Jason Cole sat in the control room of the Alliance Command base, his tired eyes scanning the translation that the AI had managed to piece together. It was short. Just 5 words: help us. They are coming. Jason leaned back in his chair. The room was silent around him. Officers looked at the screen. Their faces, a mix of awe and disbelief. For years, humanity had listened to the stars, wondering if someone else was out there now. The answer had come, but not as a greeting. It had come as a cry for help. The coordinates were far beyond human space, past the outer colonies near a region known for radiation storms and dead systems. No one had ever gone that far. And returned, the admiral on the screen told Jason the choice was his to make. He could ignore it or answer it. Jason was a man who had seen wars and loss. He remembered the day his brother's ship went missing near Titan. He had promised himself that if anyone ever called for help, and he could do something, he would never turn away. So he said quietly, "Prepare the Endeavor. We are going." Jason walked through the hangar as crews rushed to ready the ship. The Endeavor was not the newest or the largest, but it was reliable. It carried soldiers, scientists, and engineers. The kind of people who could survive anything. Among them was Laura Green, the ship's chief engineer, known for her quick mind and calm voice. She smiled faintly when she saw Jason. "You really mean to go that far?" she asked. Jason nodded. "If someone's out there dying, we cannot stay here and pretend we never heard them." Dr. Ethan Ross, the medical officer, joined them, holding his med kit tighter than usual. He was a kind man, but nervous about deep space travel. Jason clapped him on the shoulder and said, "We will be fine. Doc, humans are tougher than they look." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe. But space has a way of testing that." As the ship lifted off Earth, the crew looked down at the planet they called home. It was a beautiful blue world shining under sunlight, but every one of them knew it was also dangerous, full of storms, volcanoes, wild oceans, and predators that never stopped hunting. It had shaped them, made them strong, made them cautious, and made them stubborn. They carried that spirit with them into the stars, and now that spirit was being tested again. The journey was long. The stars outside stretched like rivers of white light. Time seemed slower out there. The further they went, the weaker the signal became, until it was nothing more than a whisper. Jason spent long hours on the bridge listening to the faint echoes on the radio, hoping to hear that same voice again. Sometimes he thought he could almost make out words. Sometimes only silence answered him. Laura worked with the engines, keeping them stable through the harsh currents of deep space. She spoke little, but the worry showed in her eyes. The others kept busy, but the air grew tense as they entered the unknown. They passed broken asteroids and the remains of ships, ancient metal husks drifting in darkness, reminders that space did not forgive mistakes. When they finally reached the coordinates, the crew gathered at the observation deck and looked out at the planet below. It was dying. They could see smoke clouds rising from cities that were nothing but ruins. Strange fire patterns burned across the land, and ships of alien design hovered in orbit like vultures. Jason ordered the ship to stay cloaked until they understood what they were seeing. He sent out small drones to scan the area. What they found confirmed the truth. There were life signs scattered across the surface, weak and fading. Jason gave the order. "We go down." The landing was rough. The ground was cracked, and the air filled with dust. They stepped out wearing light armor and breathing masks. The landscape was quiet, except for the wind carrying the faint sound of something crying. They followed it through the ruins until they found them, a group of thin, pale beings hiding in a collapsed building. Their eyes large and bright, their bodies fragile. One of them tried to stand, but fell. Jason knelt beside him and helped him up. The creature looked at him in shock, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. "You came," the alien whispered, his voice trembling. "We thought no one would." Jason smiled softly. "You called for help, so we came." The alien introduced himself as Errol. He was a leader or maybe a scientist, it was hard to tell. He explained that his people, the Vareen, had once lived in peace on this world until the Threks arrived. The Threks were not conquerors, they were destroyers. They took what they wanted and burned the rest. The Vareen had no weapons that could stop them. Most of their cities were already gone. The rest of his people were dying and hiding. The humans listened in silence. Laura examined one of the machines the Vareen had built and found it clever but powerless. Their technology was graceful, yet weak, not made for war. Ethan treated the wounded using human medicine. The Vareen watched in awe when he saved a young one, with tools they did not understand. Jason stood outside the ruins looking at the sky where the Threk ship still glowed like stars. He knew they could not fight such power directly, but he also knew what it meant to be human. They were born on a world that tried to kill them every day. They had learned to fight the cold, the hunger, and the fear of death itself. They had built cities in deserts and walked on the moon. They were not gods, but they never gave up. He turned back to Aral and said, "We will not leave you." Errol's eyes filled with tears. "Why, you owe us nothing." Jason answered, "Simply because you asked for help, and that is enough." The crew spent the night repairing what they could. The humans shared food with the Vareen and taught them how to purify water. Laura worked through the night using spare parts from the Endeavor to restore power to a small shelter. When light returned, the Vareen stared at it as if seeing the sun for the first time again. Jason watched them and felt something change inside him. He realized this was not just a rescue mission. It was something larger, something that could show the galaxy who humans really were, not monsters from a death world, not savage survivors, but people who remembered kindness. Even when the universe forgot it, as dawn broke, the radio came alive again. The Threks were sending out signals searching for survivors. They would soon find them. Jason ordered everyone to prepare. The Vareen looked at him afraid, but he smiled. "Do not fear, we have faced worse on our own world. We will find a way together." Laura came up beside him and whispered, "We are outnumbered." He nodded, but his eyes were calm, maybe but not outhearted. The sun rose higher over the burning world, and for the first time in a long time the Vareen felt hope. They did not know how these humans had come so far, or why they risked their lives for strangers. But they felt something in them. Something fierce and gentle. All at once, something that made them believe that maybe history was about to change forever. The morning came slowly over the broken land, and the sky was the color of ash. The humans and the Vareen worked side by side, clearing debris from the shelters and gathering what little food could still be found. The air was heavy with smoke and dust, but the sight of movement and effort gave the people strength again. Jason stood on the edge of a broken street, staring at the horizon, where thin trails of fire marked the path of Threk's patrol ships. Laura came to him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. She handed him a datapad showing energy readings. "The Threks have scanners sweeping the area. She said we have maybe 2 days before they find us." Jason nodded quietly, then turned to look at the Vareen who were repairing their homes. Using scraps of metal and old machinery, he could see that even in their fear there was a spark returning to them. The spark of survival. Ethan was working with a group of Vareen children, showing them how to clean wounds with simple medical tools. One of the older aliens watched him carefully, her eyes filled with curiosity. She asked why the humans risked so much for a species they did not know. Ethan only smiled and said, "Because it is what humans do. We help those who need help, even when it cost us." It was a simple answer, but it carried a weight that the Vareen could feel deep inside. Jason called a meeting. Inside the largest standing building, left half its walls gone but still useful enough for shelter, they gathered around a glowing table where the holographic map of the city flickered in weak light. The map showed Threk's patrol routes, energy centers, and the location of the last Vareen communication tower. Jason pointed at the tower and said, "If we can power this again, we can send a message to their fleet, maybe distract them long enough to move people underground." Laura frowned. "It is dangerous. If they detect the signal, they will know we are here." Jason met her eyes. We already know they are coming. We might as well make it count. He looked around the room, his voice calm but steady. The humans will help, but this is your world. And your fight too. We will not lead you. We will stand beside you. Aral, the Varine leader, bowed his head, his hands shaking slightly. Then he said, "Your world must be cruel for you to be this brave, Jason." Looked down for a moment, then said softly, "Our world teaches us to survive. It never gives anything easily, and maybe that is why we understand you more than you think for a while." No one spoke. Then Aral looked around at his people and said, "We will fight not to destroy but to live, to keep what little we have left that night while the others rested." Jason walked outside and looked up at the stars, thinking of Earth and the long road that had brought them here. He thought of his crew, of the faces of the Varine, and of the shadow of the Threx ships above. It was strange how far humans had come, yet how small they still were in the endless sky. But even small things could burn bright enough to be seen across galaxies in the morning. The humans began their plan. Laura and her team went to the communication tower. It was buried under rubble and twisted metal, the power lines dead for years. She worked with a group of Varine engineers, showing them how to rebuild circuits using the parts from crashed drones. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. She explained each step slowly, until even the Varine could follow it by noon. They had light again, a weak signal, but enough. Ethan stayed behind with the wounded, his medical station filled with the sound of quiet breathing and distant thunder from the sky. He moved from one bed to another, giving water, tending to wounds, his movements careful and his words gentle. One young Varine held his hand and whispered, "Are you afraid?" Ethan smiled, a tired smile always, "But being afraid does not stop me. It makes me remember why I must keep going." Jason led a small team through the ruined outskirts of the city setting. Traps and signal blockers using old military gear and Varine tools combined together. He had done this many times before on Earth, fighting storms and bandits after the collapse years ago. Survival had become an art for humans. They had learned how to turn fear into focus. When night fell again, the sky lit up with burning trails. The Threx had arrived. They came fast, their ships roaring through the clouds like black knives. Jason ordered everyone into the shelters. The humans moved with precision, guiding the Varine through narrow tunnels built beneath the ruins. Laura stayed at the tower, trying to hold the connection stable so the signal could reach space. Her voice over the radio was calm but strained. "We need 10 more seconds." Jason held his breath as the Threx descended, their weapons cut through the air. Explosions shook the ground, but then the signal light flashed green. Laura shouted, "We did it. The message is out," but before she could finish, the tower was hit. The explosion lit the sky. Jason shouted her name through the radio, but there was no answer for a moment. All sound vanished, replaced by a deep ringing in his ears. He ran toward the tower through smoke and fire. Ethan followed behind, carrying his kit. When they reached the site, they found Laura alive but trapped under metal beams. She looked up at them, her face pale but her eyes clear. "Did it work?" Jason nodded. She smiled weakly, then said, "Good. We bought them time," as they pulled her free. Ethan checked her pulse and whispered, "She will live." Jason looked up at the burning sky and felt a surge of anger and pride mixed together. Humans had been called many things: reckless, dangerous, unpredictable. But at that moment, he felt none of that mattered. What mattered was that they had stood their ground against something far stronger, and they had not broken. The Threx ships pulled back after the attack. Their sensors confused by the human traps. The message had been sent, and the Varine used the time to move deeper into the underground network. Jason watched them go with a heavy heart. He knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning built on courage. When the night was quiet again, Jason sat beside the fire with the surviving crew and Aral. The alien looked at him for a long time before saying, "We will never forget this. No one has ever come for us before, not even our allies." Jason shook his head. "We did not come to be heroes. We came because you needed someone, and sometimes that is enough." The flames crackled, the stars above cold and distant, and yet somehow closer than ever. The Varine children sat nearby, whispering to each other about the humans, calling them the Deathworlders from the stories. beings born from storms who walked through fire without fear. But Jason smiled when he heard that he knew the truth. They were not fearless. They were just human, and humanity was made of both strength and sorrow, of mistakes and miracles, of the will to stand even when everything falls apart as the wind carried the sound of the Threx engines far away. Jason closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of home, of oceans and forests, and the blue light of dawn on Earth. He thought of all the lives that had been lost, so others could live. He whispered quietly to himself. We came this far to prove that even in the darkest corner of space, compassion still matters. The fire burned lower, and the sound of the Varine breathing softly around him was the only thing left in the night. He felt tired, but he also felt proud. And somewhere deep inside he knew that history was moving now, slowly but surely, and the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The next day began with silence and smoke drifting over the ruined city. The sun tried to break through the haze, but its light came weak and red. The ground was still warm from the explosions, and pieces of the communication tower lay scattered. Across the streets, Jason walked among them with slow steps, checking the damage while Laura rested under medical care, her arm wrapped in bandages. Ethan sat beside her, keeping an eye on her vitals. Though her body was weak, her spirit was the same. She looked at Jason and said in a tired voice, "We did it." The message reached the Varine fleet. Jason nodded. "You did more than that. You gave them a reason to fight again outside the shelters." The Varine worked in silence, repairing what little they could. Aral stood near the entrance, his silver eyes watching the horizon where the Threx ships had disappeared. He knew they would return. They always did. But now there was something different in the air, something alive and strong. When Jason joined him, Aral said, "They will come again, stronger and angrier." Jason replied, "Then we will be ready." He looked around at the humans and the Varine working side by side, men and women covered in dust and soot, carrying supplies and building barricades even. The children were helping, bringing water and food to the workers. It reminded him of the stories his grandmother used to tell about Earth during the hard times when people rebuilt from nothing. He smiled slightly and said, "This is what humans do. We rebuild no matter what tries to break us." Laura insisted on leaving the medical tent. She joined the engineers and began teaching the Varine how to connect power cells from their fallen drones to create energy traps. She worked with steady hands, and her calm voice kept the frightened aliens focused. The Varine had never seen anyone work like her. They admired how humans did not wait for perfect tools. They made things work with whatever they had. Ethan turned the old market hall into a proper field hospital with the help of Varine healers. Together they learned from each other. The Varine used gentle blue light from their medical crystals, while Ethan used his instruments and human medicine. At first, they did not understand one another, but soon they began to combine their methods, healing wounds faster than before. Errol walked through the camp at night, listening to the humans as they worked, their voices low but firm. They spoke of home, of their families, and of their world of green, forests and endless seas to the Varine. These were stories of paradise. They could not imagine a world where life thrived in such chaos. Jason spent long hours studying the Threx patterns from the data they had gathered. He noticed something in their flight routes, a weakness between patrol shifts. If they could strike at the supply carriers, they could slow the Threx advance. He explained the plan to Aral and the others. It was dangerous, but it could work. The Varine listened quietly, some afraid, some hopeful. When Jason finished, Aral stood and said, "You risk your lives for us yet again." Jason replied simply, "We are already here. We will not stop halfway." That night before the attack, Jason gathered his small team. Laura, though still hurt, insisted on going. Ethan stayed behind to protect the wounded Aral, and a few of his strongest joined them. They moved through the ruins under the cover of darkness. The wind carried dust and faint echoes of metal groaning above their heads. The city, once full of life, now felt like a ghost watching them from every broken wall. When they reached the edge of the old spaceport, Jason gave the signal. The Varine guided them through hidden tunnels beneath the landing pads where the Threx stored their carriers. The machines were tall, black, and sharp, with engines glowing red. The humans planted charges, quietly moving like shadows. The Threx guards patrolled nearby, their steps heavy and mechanical. Errol's hands shook as he watched Jason set the detonator. He whispered, "How can you stay so calm?" Jason answered, "Because fear never helps. What helps is action." When the last charge was set, they pulled back to the tunnels and waited. Laura pressed the switch, and the ground above shook with thunder. The explosion lit the sky and the carriers burst into flames. The shockwave threw dust and light across the city for a brief moment. Everyone in the shelters looked up and saw hope burn brighter than the fire itself. The Threx ships began to fall. From the sky, one by one, the humans had done it. They had struck back for the first time since the invasion. The Varine cheered, crying tears of disbelief and joy, but the celebration was short. The Threx retaliated, sending drones to scour the city. Jason and his team ran through the narrow streets, dodging beams of light and collapsing walls. One of the Varine fell. Jason turned back to carry him. Even as the ground shook, Laura shouted behind him, "Go, we will cover you." Jason refused. No one gets. Left behind, they reached the shelters barely alive. The drones overhead fired until the last power cell drained. The humans had taken damage, but their courage never wavered. The attack ended at dawn, and for the first time in years, the Varine saw the Threx retreat. Jason stood outside the bunker, his uniform torn and his hands burned, yet his eyes were steady. Errol approached and said, "They will come again." Jason nodded. "They will. But next time, we will not face them alone. The signal you sent brought more than we hoped. Your fleet will come, and maybe others will hear too. Word spreads fast among the stars." Errol looked at him unsure and asked, "Do you really believe anyone will come?" Jason smiled softly. "They will, because this fight is not only yours. It is a reminder to everyone that evil spreads when good people stay silent, and that humans never stay silent." Laura sat nearby, watching the sun rise through the cracks of the ruined skyline. The light touched the dust, turning it gold. She thought of how strange it was that on a dying world she had seen more life than in many living cities. Before she turned to Jason and said, "We are making history." He looked at her and answered quietly, "No, Laura. We are just doing what humans do." The next days passed with constant work. The humans taught the Varine how to defend themselves using their environment. They showed them how to build barriers from stone and metal, and how to use the storm winds to hide their heat signatures. It was not much, but it was enough to give them a chance. Ethan continued to save lives. The children began to laugh again, playing around the camp. Even if for a moment Jason watched them and felt something warm in his chest. This was what they had come. For not glory, not war, but to keep hope alive far away beyond the dying horizon. More Threx fleets were gathering, but in that moment it did not matter, because on that broken world the humans had shown something the galaxy had long forgotten, that, even in the darkest places where fear ruled, there could still be light, and that light often came from the hearts of those who had already learned to survive their own nightmares. The days after the battle felt strange. The air was quiet, but not peaceful. The Varine had won a small victory. Yet everyone knew the Threx were not gone. They were gathering again beyond the horizon, waiting for the moment to strike. Jason stood on the old city wall, looking at the burned sky. The smell of smoke mixed with dust and metal. Laura joined him, carrying her toolkit, her face marked by oil and exhaustion. She said, "The new defenses are ready." "We used the last of the drone parts," Jason gave a faint nod, his eyes fixed on the distance. "Good work, Laura," he said. "We will need every second they can buy us." Ethan came walking from the medical shelter, his white uniform no longer white, but covered in blood and dirt. He stopped beside them and said softly, "The wounded are stable for now, but we are running out of supplies." Jason listened, but his thoughts were already on what lay ahead. The Threx were not an enemy to be reasoned with. They conquered worlds without mercy, leaving nothing alive behind. The Varine had told stories of planets turned to ash, their people erased from history. Jason felt the weight of it, but he also felt something stronger. Humanity had faced extinction before on their own world, and every time they had refused to surrender, that spirit still burned in them, and now it burned for others, not just for themselves. As night fell, Errol called a meeting in the main shelter. The Varine gathered close, their eyes reflecting the dim lights, while the humans stood among them like quiet pillars of strength. Errol spoke, his voice trembling but proud. He said, "Our world has known fear for too long. We believed no one would ever stand with us. But these humans have changed, that they showed us that courage is not born from strength but from choice." Jason stepped forward, He did not like speeches, but he knew they needed to hear something he said. I come from a world that tries to kill you every day. Our storms, our animals, our diseases, everything tests us, and maybe that is why we learn to fight, but we also learn to protect, because life, no matter how small, is worth fighting for. You are not alone anymore. A silence followed. Then slowly the Varine began to clap their thin hands against the ground. The sound spread through the shelter like thunder. Laura felt tears in her eyes. Ethan smiled faintly for the first time in days. That night, the humans helped the Varine finish their underground tunnels, linking the shelters into one large network. Jason moved from group to group, checking each detail. He was tired, but could not stop his mind replaying every moment of the last battles, wondering how long they could hold, if the Threx returned in full force. Laura stayed by the power station, keeping the lights running while outside drones flew patrols around the city. Errol came to her side and said, I still do not understand how your people can do so much with so little. Laura looked at him and replied, because we had to on our world. If something breaks, you fix it or you die. Errol thought about that for a long time, then said, maybe that is why your kind survived. When so many others fell the next morning, the sky turned dark. Not from clouds, but from ships the Threx had come back, this time in numbers far greater than before. The ground shook with the force of their engines. The air filled with the sound of machines. Jason ran to the command point, shouting orders. The humans took their positions while the Varine helped load the makeshift cannons. Laura stayed by the energy grid, making sure the shields held as long as possible. Ethan moved the wounded deeper underground and set up emergency lights. The attack began without warning. Beams of red light tore through the air, striking the outer walls. Explosions rocked the ground. Dust filled every corner of the city. Jason shouted over the radio to keep formation, to stay calm. The humans and Varine fought side by side, using everything they had: stones, metal rods, even old drone weapons. The Threx were stronger, but they had never faced a people who refused to fall. Laura worked non-stop as the power levels dropped. She rerouted circuits using her bare hands. Sparks burned her skin, but she kept going. When the shields flickered and died, Jason ordered everyone to fall back to the second line. They moved through smoke and fire. Errol beside him firing one of the human rifles. Though his arms shook, the sight of the alien fighting alongside them gave Jason strength. At one point, a Threx drone broke through and charged toward the wounded. Ethan ran forward using a small explosive to stop it. The blast threw him back, but he rose again. His face pale but determined, he shouted for the others to move. The battle lasted for hours, maybe longer time. Lost all meaning, the city became a storm of noise and light and fear. But through it all, the humans stood unbroken when night finally came. The Threx pulled back again, their ships retreating into the dark sky, leaving trails of fire behind them. Jason stood amid the ruins, breathing hard, his armor cracked, his hands shaking around his rifle. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant cries of the wounded. Laura limped toward him, covered in soot. She managed a small smile. We did it again. Jason looked around at the destruction, then at the faces of those who survived. Yes, he said. But at what cost? Ethan came over, supporting a wounded Varine child. His face streaked with dirt. He said softly, The Threx will return. Jason nodded. I know, but so will we. He turned to Aral, who stood nearby, his eyes bright with disbelief. Your people fought well today. Jason said, You should be proud. Aral shook his head. It was because of you, because you showed us what it means to fight. Jason looked at him and replied, No. We only reminded you of what you already had inside you. You just forgot how to use it that night. They buried their dead under the broken towers of the city. Small fires burned as markers. The Varine sang songs in their soft language, voices trembling through the cold air. The humans stood in silence, listening. Jason felt the ache in his chest for every life lost, but he also felt pride for what they had built. Together, when the ceremony ended, he walked away from the group and stood alone, looking at the stars above. They seemed closer now, brighter than before. Laura joined him quietly beside her. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaustion on his face. None of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Jason said, We came here to answer a call for help, but I think we found something bigger. We found proof that hope is stronger than fear, even in the darkest places. Laura nodded and said, maybe that is what being human really means. Ethan gave a small smile and said, then the galaxy is about to learn what humans truly are. Jason looked up at the sky, and for a moment he imagined Earth again, the blue oceans, the mountains, the winds that never stopped. He thought of how far they had come and how much further they still had to go. Somewhere out there others would hear the story of the Deathworlders who fought for strangers, and maybe they too would stand up against the darkness for now. Though there was only this quiet burned world and the small firelight of survivors holding on together one more night. Days passed after the last battle and the air began to clear. The black smoke faded from the sky and the light of the twin suns returned to the burned city. Jason and his team helped rebuild what was left with the Varine. The sound of hammers replaced. The sound of explosions. The people worked side by side, learning from each other. Every wall rebuilt felt like a victory. Every meal shared felt like hope. Arl watched the humans with silent amazement. He could not understand how they could still smile after losing so much, yet they did. Laura kept the power lines running again while teaching young Varine how to fix them. Ethan reopened the medical shelter and trained their healers in simple techniques to stop infection and save lives. It was slow work, but it gave everyone a reason to keep moving one morning. As Jason walked along the edge of the old city, he saw children playing among the ruins, their laughter echoing across the cracked streets for the first time in months. He allowed himself to smile. He remembered the day they first landed here, answering a call for help from a people they had never met. Now those same people had become family. But deep inside, Jason knew it was not over. The Threx would not accept defeat so easily. They would come again, maybe in months, maybe in years. The humans had to be ready later that day. A signal came from orbit. Laura rushed to the command post holding her communicator. She said, it is from the fleet. They made contact with Earth. Jason's heart skipped. He turned toward the screen and waited. The voice that came through was from Captain Owens of the human fleet. She said, we received your transmission. The Council has seen your report. Help is on the way. Jason felt a wave of relief, but also pride. He replied, thank you, Captain, but we are holding our ground. Owens paused, then said, we have been watching the broadcast from the Varine networks across the sector. Every world has seen what your team did. The story of humans standing with the Varine has spread faster than any message in history. Jason exchanged glances with Laura and Ethan, not understanding what that truly meant. Captain Owens continued, saying other worlds that once feared the Threx are rising. They are forming a coalition. They want to fight back, and they are asking for humans to lead them. Jason could barely find words. The Deathworlders, who had once been seen as dangerous, unstable and violent, were now being called protectors, heroes, even legends across the stars. He thought of all the times humanity had been judged by their harsh world, by their history of wars and mistakes. Now that same history had become their strength. That evening, Jason gathered the survivors together in the rebuilt square of the city. Torches lit the night, and the air carried the sound of soft music from the Varine flutes. Jason stood on a broken pillar so everyone could see him. He looked at the crowd, humans and Varine standing shoulder to shoulder, and he said, when we came here, we did not come as conquerors. We came because someone asked for help, and we could not ignore that we are from a world that taught us how to survive. But today I think we learned something greater, how to live together. Errol stepped forward, his voice clear and strong, and said, this world will never forget the humans who answered our call. The Varine will tell your story to every star, so that no one will forget that courage can come from the most unexpected places. The crowd cheered, their voices echoing into the dark sky. Jason looked around and felt the fire inside him burn brighter. He thought of the others on Earth who would hear about this, the children who would grow up believing that humans could be more than just survivors, that they could be protectors of life itself. As the night went on, the people danced and sang around the fires. Laura sat beside the power core, smiling as she watched them. Ethan stood nearby, talking quietly with a group of Varine healers, teaching them about medicine. Jason walked through the crowd, shaking hands with soldiers and workers, his heart full of something he had not felt in a long time, peace. But the universe was not done with them yet. Weeks later, a message arrived. From the new coalition, they wanted Jason and his team to represent humanity in the first United Council of Free Worlds. It was something no one had ever seen before. Species from across the stars gathering, not in fear, but in unity. Jason accepted. The call, knowing this was only the beginning when they left the Varine world. The sky was filled with ships both human and alien together. They formed a new fleet, not of war, but of defense, a symbol of hope. Jason stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the blue surface of the planet fade into the distance beside him. Laura adjusted the systems while Ethan monitored the crew. Errol was with them now, representing his people as the first Varine ambassador to humanity. Jason said softly to no one in particular, "We came here to help one world, and now the whole galaxy is changing." Laura smiled and said, "Maybe that is what we do. We start small, and it grows." Ethan laughed quietly and said, "We just need to make sure we do not break the galaxy." While fixing it, Jason looked at them both and said, "Then let's make sure we fix it right." Their ship joined the formation of the new fleet, and together they moved into the stars behind them. The Varine planet shined like a small blue jewel in the darkness, a living proof that unity was possible across the galaxy. The story of the Deathworlders spread faster than light. It was told in marketplaces on distant moons, whispered by traders in deep space, and sung by children who had never seen Earth. The words changed from world to world, but the heart of it remained the same. When darkness came, humans answered and history was made.